The blood was not the problem. Dave and Cole had seen worse. A metal panel had caught him across the forearm during an unloading job. Clean slice deep enough to need attention, not deep enough to slow him down. He had wrapped it with cargo tape for 2 hours before his ship docked at Oruruvel Station. He found the medical bay on the 3rd floor, walked in and sat down on the nearest bench without being asked. The station was quiet at this hour. Long white corridors, soft blue lighting, the kind of place that smelled like recycled air and antiseptic, and something faintly floral that was probably meant to calm patients down. It was working on everyone except Daven, who did not need calming. He was just tired and wanted stitches. The healer who came to see him was a Mjai. Daven had met a few tall, thin fingers, too long skin that glowed faintly in shifting patterns depending on mood. This one had pale gold light running along his jaw and up behind his ears. His name tag read Dr. Civil. He looked at Dave in the way a technician looks at a machine he has not encountered before. Not rude, just precise. Human, Civil said, pulling up a display pad. Last time I checked, David said. Civil did not smile, but his light patterns shifted briefly. He noted the wound, noted David's name and ship registration, and then reached for the full body scanner on the wall, a wide, flat panel that most species stood in front of for 2 or 3 seconds while it swept top to bottom and produced a clean readout. David stood in front of it. The scanner ran. 2 seconds passed, then 3, then 6. Civil glanced up. The machine was still running. Its progress bar was moving, but slowly, the way it moved when it hit something complicated. David watched the ceiling and said nothing. 8 seconds, 9. A soft chime. Then an alert code appeared on the readout screen. A yellow triangle that pled a small insectoid nurse who had appeared silently at Civil's side, clearly recognized as unusual because her antenna went rigid. 11 seconds total. The scanner finished. Civil looked at the display. His skin light dimmed to almost nothing, which David had learned. Minami was thinking hard. The readout was long. Most species produced 1 page of data, basic structural summary, organ function, atmospheric compatibility notes. David's readout was 4 pages with 2 flag sections highlighted in yellow and 1 in orange. Civil scrolled in silence. Iron-based hemoglobin. Unusual notation beside it. No known equivalent in any carbon-based species of similar mass. Skeletal density reading flagged. The system had compared it to 17 different species and found no close match. Healed microfractures, 14 distinct sites, all fully repaired, none currently active. Soft tissue scarring, multiple layers, multiple locations, consistent with repeated physical trauma over a long period of time. And then at the bottom in the trace chemical analysis section, a line that Civil read: twice distributed iron deposits, systemic, not localized to blood, present in soft tissue boundaries. Source: dietary. Civil looked up from the display. Daven was sitting back down on the bench, rewrapping the cargo tape on his arm out of habit. "You can stop doing that," Civil said. "I will treat the wound properly." He paused. His light came back slightly, a steady, dim amber. He asked the question carefully, the way someone asks a question when they already have a guess but want to hear the answer out loud. "What is the metal in your blood?" David looked up. "Iron," he said. "Iron," Civil repeated. "Yeah. Is that a problem?" Civil looked back at the readout, then at Daven, then at the readout again. Plea had not moved. Her antennae were still pointing straight up. "It is not a problem," Civil said slowly. "It is simply not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Something simpler." Civil set the display down and picked up his medical kit. Most species your size use copper-based or vanadium-based blood chemistry. Iron is rare. It is heavy. It requires a specific kind of environment to be useful in that concentration. He began cleaning the wound, his 6 fingers moving with practiced speed. "Your body carries a significant amount of it." "We're built that way," David said. "Yes," Civil said. "You are." He worked on the wound for a while without speaking. "It was a clean cut," The edges were already beginning to pull toward each other on their own, which Civil noticed and did not comment on yet. He sealed it in 3 passes and pressed a thin bandage over the top. Then he sat back on his stool and looked at Daven with the full attention of someone who has just realized a routine appointment is not routine at all. "I would like to run a more detailed scan," he said. "Manual examination. It would take longer." Daven shrugged. "My next haul doesn't leave until tomorrow morning. Then you have time. I have time," Daven agreed. Civil picked up his display pad again. Outside the examination room through the glass partition, 2 off-duty medical staff had appeared in the corridor. They were standing very still, holding things they were not actually using, looking anywhere except directly through the glass. David noticed them. He did not say anything. Civil noticed David noticing his skin light shifted. A brief flicker of something that might have been embarrassment on a human face. "They are curious," Civil said. "Most people are," David said. "That's once they look long enough." Civil nodded once and began typing up the extended exam request. The scanner on the wall had already reset itself, ready for the next patient. It had never taken 11 seconds before. Nobody told the off-duty staff to leave. They just kept drifting back. By the time Civil had David seated in examination room 4 with the full manual scanner array deployed, there were 4 people outside the glass partition. A lab technician, 2 recovery nurses, and a species Daven did not recognize who appeared to be a patient herself, but had wandered over anyway. They all had something in their hands. Clipboards, data pads, a cup of something warm, props. David had seen soldiers hold weapons the same way, not to use them, just to have something to do with their hands while they watched. He let them watch. It did not bother him. Civil moved through the examination in order the way a good engineer moves through a checklist. No rushing, no skipping, nothing out of sequence. He had David's full scan results on a display beside him and was working from the flag sections outward. He started with the bones. The density reader was a handheld tool flat on one end that Civil pressed against different points of the skeleton and read the resistance values on his pad. He started at the forearm, the uninjured one, and the tool gave him a number. He looked at it. He looked at Daven. He pressed the tool against the bone again. Same number. "Your skeletal density," Civil said carefully, "is approximately twice the baseline reading for a species of your mass and height." "Okay," David said. "Does your home world have elevated gravity?" "No. Pretty standard." Civil wrote something down. His skin light was doing the amber dimming thing again. David was starting to recognize it as Civil's version of a furrowed brow. He moved to the shoulder, the hand, the collarbone. Each reading came back in the same elevated range. When he got to Daven's left leg and pressed the tool against the thigh bone, the number was even higher. Civil paused. "You have significant old impact damage here," he said. "Healed, but the density at the repair site is greater than the surrounding bone." "Yeah, that one broke pretty bad," David said. "Cargo loader fell on it few years back, and you are walking on it normally. It healed." Civil looked at him. "Human bone regenerates stronger at fracture sites usually." "Yeah, that's what the doctors told me." Civil made a longer note this time. He moved through the full fracture count after that. Methodical. Patient. He would find a healed break, mark it, and then ask. David answered each one without much drama. Left wrist fell from a loading dock. 2 ribs on the right side, compressed during a whole breech drill that went wrong. 3 fingers on the right hand, all at once machinery accident. The left shoulder, the war, the small bones in his right foot, 2 of them. He had kept working for a week before anyone made him get them scanned. At fracture 9, Civil stopped asking and just listened. At fracture 12, Plek, who had come into the room quietly and was standing near the door with her data pad, made a small sound, not a word, just a sound. She caught herself and went back to her notes. 14 fractures total, all fully healed, none causing any current complications. Civil set down the density reader. "Your muscle fiber composition is also unusual," he said, moving to the next section. The layering is denser than expected. The fiber-type distribution suggests sustained heavy load bearing over a long period. He glanced at the display. What is your occupation? Cargo, transport, freight. You lift things mostly. I load and unload things. Yeah, and I do maintenance on the ship. Physical work. Do you follow a structured exercise program? David thought about it. Not really. I just work. Civil looked at the muscle composition reading, then at Daven, then back at the reading. And the wound, Civil said, moving on. He pulled up the scan data from the initial read-in. Your laceration. He nodded at Daven's bandaged forearm. When did this occur? Daven checked his internal clock out of habit. About 4 hours ago now. Little over. Civil peeled back the bandage carefully. The wound was sealed. The edges had pulled together cleanly, and the top layer of skin was already laying flat over the closure, not fully healed. That would take days, but the initial repair had moved faster than it had any reason to. Sibyl sat back. He did not say anything for a moment. The amber light along his jaw was steady and bright. Outside the glass, the small audience had grown by one more. Another technician who had found a reason to be in the corridor. Does it hurt? Civil asked. The question was different from the others. It was not clinical. It was not part of the checklist. David looked at him, and Civil held the look without flinching. The arm, David asked. All of it? Civil said, carrying all of this. The density, the old damage, the weight of it. He paused. Does it hurt? Dawn was quiet for a second. It was not the silence of someone who did not understand the question. It was the silence of someone who had not been asked before. You get used to it, he said. Civil nodded slowly. He pressed the bandage back into place and picked up his display pad. I am going to pull the full Galactic database entry on human biology, he said. I would like you to eat something while I read it. He glanced at Plea the medical lounge, please. Plea moved immediately. She was out the door before Civil finished the sentence. Outside the glass, the audience watched Daven stand up. He stretched once casually, the way a man stretches after sitting still for too long. None of them were sure that was what this had been. The medical lounge had 6 tables, a food dispenser on the far wall, and a window that looked out over the station's lower docking ring. David picked the table nearest the window out of habit, old cargo worker reflex. Always know what is moving outside. He got something from the dispenser that was warm and beige and tasted roughly like rice if rice had never met seasoning. He ate it without complaint. Civil arrived 10 minutes later with his display pad and a tall drink of something green. He sat across from Daven and immediately began reading. Pluck took a seat 2 tables away and opened her data pad at an angle that was obviously meant to look like she was doing her own work. David ate, Civil read. For a while, the lounge was quiet. Then Civil said without looking up, Your stress hormone system, what about it? Adrenaline. Civil finally looked up. In emergency situations, your body releases a chemical compound that increases physical output. Strength, speed, pain suppression. He paused. Pain suppression. Yeah, David said. You stop feeling pains in emergencies, not stop. It gets quieter like someone turned the volume down. Civil considered that. And this is a biological function, not a trained response. It's both. You can train for it, but the base system is just there built in. Civil made a note, and when the situation ends, then it comes back, usually harder. Civil wrote that down too. The questions kept coming, but not in a rush. Civil moved through topics the way he had moved through the examination, steady, ordered, nothing wasted. He asked about the ribs Daven had cracked. David explained that he had finished a 2-day freight run before going to a doctor because the cargo contract had a penalty clause, and the ribs were not his dominant side. Civil stopped writing and looked at him. David looked back. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Civil wrote something down and moved on. He asked about the war. Daven had mentioned it during the fracture count just as context, not as a story. Now Civil asked directly, What war? When? How long? David gave him the short version. Regional conflict lasted 4 years. He had been in engineering corps, mostly keeping vehicles and structures operational under fire. How many such conflicts has your species had? Civil asked. David thought about it. Big ones counting just the last few hundred years. A few major ones. Dozens of smaller ones against outside forces against each other, mostly. Civil was quiet. His light had gone a very steady flat amber, the color Daven now associated with deep processing like a computer working through too many inputs at once. You made war against your own species, Civil said repeatedly. Daven said without pride or shame, just fact, and you are still here. Still here. Civil looked down at his display. He scrolled to something and read it again. The first recorded human vessel to reach this region of space launched from your planet during what your historians classify as a post-crisis recovery period. Your planet was still dealing with resource damage from a previous industrial collapse. You launched anyway. David shrugged. People were ready to go. The crew was documented at their first neutral station stop. One of them had an untreated fracture. Sounds about right. Civil looked at him. Does it not seem remarkable to you? Launching into an unknown region of space under those conditions with an injured crew member who said nothing about it. David thought for a moment. She probably didn't want to be left behind. Civil stared at him. His skin light flickered. From 2 tables away, Plex said very quietly, "Does it stop you?" Fear. Both Civil and Daven looked at her. She had not moved. Her antennae were pointed carefully at her datapad, but her eyes were on Daven. He turned the question over. He took it seriously. "No," he said, "it doesn't stop us. It slows some people down for a while. But it doesn't stop." "Why not?" she asked. He looked out at the docking ring below the window. A cargo hauler was moving slowly into position. Big ship, old model, hull plates patched in 3 different colors. "Because there's always something on the other side of it," he said. "Whatever you're scared of, usually there's something you want more than you're scared, and you find out which one is stronger." Plek was quiet. She wrote something on her datapad. David suspected it was not medical notes. Civil drank some of his green drink. He looked tired, but not in a bad way. More like a man who had been reading a very long book and had just reached the part where everything started to make sense. "I have been a healer for 19 years, he said. "I have treated over 60 species. I have never encountered a biological profile like yours." He sat down the drink, "not because it is the strongest or the most efficient." He paused, "because it reads like a record. Everything in your body is evidence of something that happened and was survived." David looked at him. "Is that good or bad?" "I do not know yet," Civil said, "but it is extraordinary, and I do not think you realize it." David looked back at the window. The patch cargo hauler had settled into its dock. Somewhere on that ship, someone had fixed something that broke and kept going. He did not say anything. There was nothing to say. Civil worked late. The station had a rhythm. Meals at set times, shift changes every 8 hours, the low hum of the ventilation cycling through its nightly mode. Most of the medical staff had gone to their quarters. The ward was down to 2 on-call nurses and the ambient sound of monitoring equipment. Civil was in his research office at the end of the east corridor, which was barely large enough for a desk, 2 screens, and a small shelf of physical specimens he kept for reference. He had not moved in 3 hours. His green drink had gone cold beside him. He was looking at old records. The Galactic Medical Institute kept contact archives going back several hundred years. Every species that had made verified first contact with established galactic civilization, their initial medical scans, their crew manifests, the notes written by whatever station doctor had processed them. Most of these records were dry. A few were interesting. The human file was 47 pages long and had 3 separate flags attached to it from different review periods, each one noting the same thing in different language. Anomalous. Further study recommended. No follow-up conducted. The first human crew to reach a neutral station had arrived in a ship that the docking registry listed as modified commercial freighter. Civilian designation, not a military vessel, not a government science ship. A modified freighter, the kind of ship you build when you do not have the budget for the kind of ship you want. The hull had been repaired in transit. The crew of 7 had all presented for basic medical intake. Civil read the intake scans. Iron hemoglobin, dense bone, layered scar tissue. One crew member, female 30s, listed occupation as navigator, had a stress fracture in her left foot. The examining doctor at the time had noted it in the file, asked about it, and recorded her response. She was aware of it. It had happened 8 weeks prior. She had not wanted to delay departure. 8 weeks. She had walked on a fractured foot for 8 weeks because she did not want to miss the launch. Civil sat back. He pulled up a broader search. Human vessels and crews processed through neutral stations in the first 20 years of contact. 43 separate medical intake records. He ran a comparison filter across all of them. Healed fractures, scar tissue, stress injuries listed as pre-existing. The results came back. 31 of the 43 records had at least one pre-existing injury in the crew, not injuries from travel. Old injuries. Injuries from before they left. A broken hand fully healed but still showing density changes at the repair site. A shoulder that had been dislocated and reset more than once. Ribs. Always ribs in multiple records. The crew of one early exploration ship had a combined total of 22 healed fractures among 5 people. They had launched anyway. All of them. Civil stared at the number for a while. Then he heard a knock at his open door. David was standing in the corridor. He had found a lounge chair somewhere and clearly slept for a few hours. There was a crease on the side of his face from a cushion. He was holding 2 cups of something from the dispenser. Saw the light under the door. David said, "You want one?" Civil looked at the cold green drink on his desk. "Yes," he said. David came in and sat in the only other chair, which was technically for patients, but which he moved closer to the desk without asking. He handed Civil one of the cups, hot, brown, bitter-smelling, and looked at the screens. Civil turned them so Daven could see. He pointed to the fracture comparison data and waited. Don leaned forward and read it. He was quiet for a while. "Yeah," he said finally. "These are your first contact crews," Civil said. "People who chose to be the first humans in unknown space, and 31 of 43 ships carried crew members with pre-existing injuries that any medical board would have flagged as grounds for delay." "They didn't want to wait," David said. "Why not?" David thought about it. "Because waiting is how you miss the thing." He turned the cup in his hands. "There's always a reason to wait. Another launch window, another ship. Wait until you're fully healed. Wait until conditions are better. People who wait for perfect conditions mostly just keep waiting." Civil looked at him. "When we first cataloged your species, the official designation in the medical database was medium threat, low concern, manageable, limited reach." David said nothing. "We are revising that." Civil said, "What's the holdup?" Civil was quiet for a moment. "We do not know what category to use." Daven turned to look at him directly. "We're not a threat category," he said. "We're just people." He meant it. No performance in it, no edge. Just a flat, honest statement. Most of us just want to do our jobs and get home. Civil believed him. He also understood, looking at the fracture data on the screen and the man sitting next to it, that this was perhaps the most complicated thing about humans. They were not dangerous because they were recessive. They were not dangerous because they were powerful. They were complicated because they genuinely did not think of themselves as remarkable. 31 injured crews launching into unknown space. All of them certain they were just doing the next reasonable thing. "Go back to sleep," Civil said. "I have more reading to do." David stood, took his cup, and walked out. His footsteps were even and quiet in the empty corridor. Civil looked at the screen. Then he opened a new document and began to write. David left in the morning. His ship had a departure window at the 7th hour, and he was the kind of man who arrived early without making a point of it. He had his jacket on, his small travel bag over one shoulder, and his bandaged arm moving freely. No stiffness, no favoring, just a clean, sealed wound doing what wounds do when a body is working the way it should. The docking corridor on the third level was long and narrow with soft overhead lights that had not quite shifted from their night setting yet. The station was just starting its morning cycle. Somewhere behind him, the smell of something warm was coming out of the lounge. Civil was waiting at the end of the corridor. He had his display pad under one arm and the slightly distracted look of someone who had not slept much but had gotten a great deal done. His skin light was steady, a clear pale gold, calm and even. "You did not have to come down," David said. "I wanted to tell you. The report is finished." Civil said the first complete physiological profile of a human conducted at this station. "It will go to the Galactic Medical Institute by end of day." He paused. "You will be cited as the subject. I wanted you to know. That's fine." David said the findings are significant. "I believe it will result in a full review of how human biology is classified and taught in medical programs across the network." He said it plainly without ceremony. It was information deserved to have. David nodded. He looked down the corridor at his ship, then back at Civil. "Where do you go after here?" he asked. "Station like this. You move around where you stay. I have been at Oruruvel for 6 years," Civil said. "I may stay longer. The work here is varied. Good station for that." Daven said they stood there for a moment in the way people stand when a conversation is ending, but neither of them is quite done. "If you come back through this sector," Civil said, "I would like to continue the study voluntarily. I have more questions about healing rates over time, about how the bone density changes with age about." He stopped himself. "If you have no interest, that is fine. I'll be back through in a few months," David said. "I'll come find you." Civil's light shifted briefly, a quick ripple of something lighter than his usual amber. He noted it and composed himself. Then Daven reached into his jacket pocket. It was a small thing he pulled out, flat, round, worn smooth on both faces. Metal, clearly old. The design on it barely visible anymore. He held it out. Civil looked at it, then at Daven. "It's from Earth," Daven said. "Old Earth before the unification period, back when different regions had their own currencies." He turned it once between his fingers. "Some people carry them. Habit mostly. Some say it's for luck." "And you?" Civil asked. David thought about it. "I carry it because my grandfather gave it to me. He got it from his grandmother. He didn't know where she got it, but it made it all the way here." So he shrugged. "It's had a good run." He held it out again. Civil took it. It was heavier than it looked. Civil turned it over in his long fingers, feeling the worn edges, the faint ghost of an image on one face. Something circular. Something with text around the rim that he could not read, but suspected had once been important to someone. He reached for his scanner. Pure instinct. The reflex of a man who processes things by understanding their composition, and then stopped himself. But David had already seen the motion. "Go ahead," he said. Sybil scanned it. The result came back in 2 seconds. Copper, tin, trace, zinc, alloy, consistent with manufacturing techniques from several centuries prior. The coin was somewhere between 200 and 300 years old. He looked at it again with that number in his head. "You carry pieces of your history in your pockets," he said. David smiled. It was a real one. Small, easy, not performed. "Doesn't everybody?" He picked up his bag and walked down the corridor. His boots were quiet on the floor. He did not look back, not because he was cold about it, but because he was the kind of person who moves forward without making a show of it. Civil stood at the end of the corridor and watched the dock bay door close behind him. He looked down at the coin in his hand. Then he scanned it one more time, not for new information, just to have it recorded, just so it would exist in the file alongside everything else. A piece of metal 2 to 3 centuries old, carried across the known galaxy, in the pocket of a man with iron in his blood and 14 healed fractures, and a wound on his arm that was already quietly continuing to close. Civil walked back to his office. He had a report to finalize. The coin went on the corner of his desk, beside the scanner where he would see it every time he looked up from his work. The report reached the Galactic Medical Institute on a Tuesday, which was not a meaningful fact, except that it arrived between two other reports. One on respiratory adaptation, one on a Meyer-Tate bone density study that Civil himself had submitted 4 years ago, and it was opened by a junior researcher named Daven, who had been assigned morning intake that week. Daven read the first page, then the second. Then she sent it to her supervisor with a flag on it that read urgent, unusual. Her supervisor read it and sent it up. By the time it reached the review board, people had added flags of their own. The board convened 3 days later. There were 7 members seated around a round table on the Institute's central station, each with the report loaded on their display. The lead reviewer, a Mirate elder named Voris, who had been practicing medicine for 41 years, read the full document twice before the session began. He came in and sat down and did not speak for 2 full minutes after everyone was settled. Then he said, "Has anyone else seen a human in person?" 2 of the 7 had. They talked about it for a while. The report was thorough. Civil had not written it to impress. He had written it to be accurate, which turned out to be the same thing. It covered everything: the scan data, the density readings, the fracture history, the wound healing rate, the adrenaline system, the dietary iron, the blood chemistry, the muscle composition. It included the historical comparison data from the first contact archives. It included Civil's notes from the lounge conversation and the late-night discussion in the research office, formatted as observational data rather than anecdote. At the end, in the section marked Summary and Recommendations, Civil had written, "Human physiology is not unusual because it is superior. It is unusual because it is a record. Every elevated density reading, every healed fracture, every chemical adaptation is evidence of a species that has been under sustained pressure across its entire evolutionary history and has continued to function through all of it. The iron in human blood is not an anomaly. It is efficiency. Iron is abundant on their home world. They consumed it, processed it, built their infrastructure from it, and integrated it at the biological level. They then carried it into space and were surprised that anyone found it noteworthy. The repeated pattern in first contact records, crews launching with pre-existing injuries, personnel continuing to function through damage that most species would classify as incapacitating, is not recklessness. It is consistent with a species that has normalized endurance as a baseline state. They do not experience their own persistence as remarkable. This may be the most significant finding in this report." Voris looked up from the final page. "What classification does he recommend?" One of the board members asked. "None," Voris said. He read the last paragraph aloud. "Humans do not require a new threat category or a revised concern level. They require understanding. I recommend the database entry be updated with the following addition. Handle with the same respect extended to any species that has earned its place among the stars. But remember that this one earned it in a difficult environment on a world that provided no easy conditions. And they arrived here still carrying the evidence of everything they survived. They will not mention it. They will not ask to be recognized for it. They will simply keep going." The room was quiet after that. Voris set down his display pad. He looked out the window beside his seat where the station's outer ring was visible, and beyond it a slow stream of ships moving in and out of the transit lane, cargo haulers, medical transports, a few small private vessels. "Approve the report," he said, "recommended as required reading in all first contact medical training." He pushed back his chair and updated the file. Back on Oruruvel, 3 weeks after that, Civil was in his office doing the same work he always did. New patients, new intake scans, the steady, ordinary work of a station medical bay on a quiet week. He had treated a Veluan with a torn tendon that morning, a young cat with a respiratory infection in the afternoon, and was currently finishing notes on a routine dental complaint that had turned out to be a slightly misaligned jaw. Nothing serious, easily fixed, his calm chimed. It was the incoming freight manifest for the next 2 days of docking arrivals. He skimmed it out of habit. Sometimes patients came in off arriving ships, and it was useful to know who was expected. Near the bottom under scheduled arrivals, Day 2, Coal D Cargo Transport, Sector 12 Freight Run, ETA 6. Civil looked at the coin on the corner of his desk. The worn copper face, the ghost of an old design, 2 to 3 centuries old and still here. He pulled up a blank intake file. He typed a name at the top. He thought for a moment, then typed beneath it, voluntary ongoing case study, extended follow-up. He set the file aside and went back to his notes. The station moved through its evening cycle. The lights shifted to their softer setting. Somewhere in the docking ring below, ships came and went in the slow, steady rhythm of the galaxy, doing what it always did. In 2 days, a battered cargo hauler would ease into dock. A man with iron in his blood and old fractures, and a new wound, almost healed, would walk in unhurried, not expecting anything. Civil would be ready.